Hi, I'm Gabriela Houston. Welcome to my channel where we discuss storytelling in all its forms. It's my belief that storytelling is an intrinsic part of everyday life as well as an important part of many professions. On the show, I talk to writers, artists, journalists, researchers, and more about how they use storytelling in their jobs and life. So today's guest is Zuza Zak. Zuza learned the art of cooking from an early age from her beloved grandmas. In her previous writing, Polska, Amber and Rye and Pierogi, and her food-focused PhD at the School of Slavonic and East European Studies, UCL, Zuza explores food in the context of identity, society, and culture. You can currently see Zuza across Europe and the Middle East presenting Polish food in Food Network Finds Poland. During the Polish launch of Polska, Zuza took part in a live breakfast TV broadcast, Dzień Dobry TVN, watched by millions of Poles. Her newest book, which we'll be focusing on today, Slavic Kitchen Alchemy, is an illustrated scrapbook of Slavic lore, and it offers natural remedies, beauty and cleaning products, healing recipes, and well-being rituals that will appeal to modern witches and natural healing fans, as well as introducing some Slavic stories. Thank you so much for coming, Zuza. This was, I think, the longest introduction I've done because your resume is quite impressive.
Thank you so much. It's so lovely to be here. It's lovely to chat to you, and I really enjoyed having the Polish connection as well before the show.
Yes, and I love that, reading through the Slavic Kitchen Alchemy, I love the connections that you make to your heritage and to Polish folklore is the connection I often talk about in interviews where I'm interviewed. So I think we're going to have a great chat today. So I just wanted to, so the Slavic Kitchen Alchemy, even like starting from the title, alchemy, it carries fairy tale-like associations. How, oh yes, that's a beautiful book. And it's so visually stunning as well.
Oh, thank you.
So I wanted to ask about the title, like alchemy. How did you arrive at it?
Um, Actually, that was my brother's idea. Basically, my previous books were cookbooks, so this is something slightly different. There are recipes in here, but what I really wanted to focus on was kind of herbs and stories, and write a different kind of recipe book. So we were sort of thinking of the word maybe apothecary, although I was talking to my brother about it, who's very good with words, and I was sort of thinking apothecary kind of just brings to mind, I don't know, like an old pharmacy or something. It's a very cool word, but it's not exactly, wasn't exactly what I had in mind. And he came up with alchemy, and I loved it because um, it brings to mind various different levels. So there is, of course, the alchemy of just, picking some herbs and brewing some tea. But there's also it also suggests maybe like a transformation on a slightly different level. And actually it's something that happens when we listen to stories as well, and when we cook. And even just talking, I guess, can be alchemy if you're sharing ideas,
In a
and
kind of chemistry sense. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, it has that kind of very strong a magical element to
Yes.
it. So, and it really ties in. So it's broad enough that it ties in with all those little stories you tell from your life and from your research. And I absolutely loved that. And I thought how like you move very smoothly between the practical usage of herbology and the spiritual connotations of food, and so that connection between food, herbology, and folk culture. So obviously you've done so much research on it, you have a PhD. What drew you to this?
Um, Actually, I've had to pause in the middle of my PhD. I'm sorry to disappoint, because starting a PhD before your child goes to school, I realized was madness. So I've I've taken a little pause in that for the time being. But actually, what it was memories of my babcia Jutta, and she was not well educated at all, but she
Your
had this,
grandma for non-Polish speakers, yeah.
yeah, my grandma, but she had this encyclopedic knowledge of folk knowledge of plants, you know, so you would go walking with her and she would know what each plant was good for. And I just, you know, I remember I was just always so fascinated by it. And the more you talk to kind of people of her generation, um, and in different families, you realize that everyone has their own kind of herbology, you know,
Mm.
and often it's very simple as well. You also find a lot of magazines in Poland, you know, everyone's obsessed with this kind of how to, how to heal yourself, you know, through
Mm.
herbs. And it's kind of never really
Yes.
gone away in Poland. It's not like some new
It's a
trend.
national obsession. I
Yeah.
think Polish people, I read somewhere a statistic, consume more natural supplements per capita than anywhere else.
Really, that's interesting. There you go. That was just a hunch, but that was just like,
Yes, so it
and there
is
you
like,
go. It's actually proven.
I mean, I find it interesting, just to sort of bring back to what you said, like when you say about your grandma's sort of education, that she wasn't, you know, a very well educated woman, and yet then you talk about this wealth of knowledge that she had. And I really would love for people to bring back that knowledge and to sort of treat it with the respect that it really deserves. Because even though, you know, we like people tend to look at herbology as a kind of lesser knowledge, but yet we are finding a lack in like our diets in our everyday life when we're moving further and further away from understanding, you know, what we're eating and what goes into our bodies, and bringing that knowledge back is so important.
Yeah, I agree. And Um, I think that knowledge is still there, but unfortunately, it is dying out with the older generations, and that's part of the reason why I wrote the book. For me, um, I don't feel like I'm an expert. I feel like my role is in preserving,
Mm.
um, just preserving knowledge of from my heritage, from my grandmas, from other people that I meet, just to prevent it from dying out, because you know there's so much of it out there. And this book, I mean, um, I love it so much, and I tried to include all the stuff that you know that I use, but I mean, there's obviously so much more, you know. My physiotherapist, Magda, who I mentioned in the book, I mean, she is translating her grandma's and her aunt's like notebooks and doing,
Mm.
you know, really in-depth research. And there's so much more in that whole world that, you know, that's just willing, you know, waiting to be found and translated or just at least passed on orally.
Mm. I mean, I love that also when you sort of at the very beginning of your book, you mention how you know, it's not that you are necessarily seeking to go back to the good old days, you know. I think and I think it's so important to mention that, you know, the life that our great grandparents had, you know, great grandparents, like that was a hard life. You know, it would. So even though we look at it with through rose tinted glasses, being close to the earth, so it's important to sort of understand that, as well as seeking knowledge from that time.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, it's not like everything our ancestors knew and thought was correct. You know, there's a lot of, you know, I felt like in writing this book, I really had to, I didn't want to include lots of superstitions in it because I feel like the Slavs are so superstitious, and then I think you can make a lot of mistakes as well, you know, if you're
Mm.
too superstitious and too caught up in that. For example, my friend Marta was saying how her father, he got hit by lightning through a lightning bolt through a fireplace,
Mm-hmm.
and basically her mother saved him, but before she could, I think, gosh, was it? Yeah, first she basically, because he fell on the floor, he kind of like shot him across the room, and she picked him up. And by picking him up, and she was standing on the ground, she had some kind of like adrenaline, and she sort of grounded it. But then the villagers came up, and all the villagers were like, "We've got to help him. We've got to bury him in the ground to ground him." So they went and started burying him, dragged him away, and then the ambulance came and they took him out of the ground, and they were like, to her mother, "You saved his life because what you did was correct. It was your instinct."
Yeah.
People also had a lot of stupid ideas, they're trying to be helpful, but it's not like everything
Yes. It's
is
like
our ancestors knew was useful
yeah.
or helpful or anything like that. I think there's still a lot of like, so I wanted to just pick out kind of the little bits of gold dust, the things that I feel
Yes.
like really are helpful, and just kind of, maybe mention some like some interesting superstitions here or there, or a bit of, and I wanted to have a bit of magic. I feel like magic does work, but it's not like, I'm not a magical practitioner. I think, if you're a magical practitioner, I'm sure magic works for you, but I don't think like anyone can just be like going, right, we've got to do this because, that's grounding, bury him in the ground, like you can't just, I think you have to be careful as well with some knowledge.
I think so the line between sort of folk wisdom and superstition magic, like that line is not the same for everyone, and it's not clear for everyone. And I think on a kind of the scientific level, the thing that kind of helps ground us in a kind of modern day is trying to see, well, what does the research say on the subject, right? And we tend to dismiss anything with positive effect as a kind of, well, if there's no like actual research on it, peer reviewed, then it might be placebo effect, right? But that so it's things like, but there's things, very real, very helpful remedies like, thyme tea for dry cough, right?
Mhm.
And around COVID, when a lot of my friends suffered from very dry, exhausting cough for
Mhm.
months, I would tell them just like to brew thyme tea for dry cough, not very like mucusy, but just 6 minutes dry thyme, and it helps so tremendously. But the first instinct is that sounds ridiculous. I mean, there's all those medications, and only when you actually see on the ingredients that there's like thyme extract in most of the
Yeah.
dry cough
Yeah.
medicines do people begin to think like, oh, maybe there's something in it, isn't it?
Yeah, actually, the last time I had COVID, because I've had COVID 3 times, I managed not to take any medicines, and what I took was plantain tea, and I also put
Mm.
thyme in it as well. But I found even just little plantain leaves that you find, on most lawns are really, really helpful for coughs as well. I found it incredibly, incredibly soothing, and yeah. I was trying out various tea mixes, but plantain was like the base for all of
I
them. That was
I
something
don't
quite
think I know what you mean by plantain, because I'm imagining the big banana
babka,
thing.
babka.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. I know.
Not that that will mean anything to anyone, because babka could be anything. Like, it's like Poles call anything a babka. It could be a cake, it could be a
Yeah.
plant, it could be a woman. I mean,
It's a very easy language. I don't know what you're talking about. But, like when we're talking about faith and superstition, right? We have to touch on that kind of the Christian faith in Poland, and you sort of mention it in the book about the particular nature of Catholicism in Poland, and I think it's commonly referred to as folk Catholicism or folk Christian practice. So, how much do you look at it in terms of a sort of Slavic influence, and like how did you conduct your research into that?
Oh gosh, that was, yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because Catholicism is such a big part of the whole folk culture. And when you read any kind of like Polish books, for example, I love Horodowicz. It's like, I can't remember the exact title of the book, but like Polish folk medicines, and it goes very like deeply into all the kind of saints, and they all have their different herbs and
Mm.
things like that. And it's such a big part of it. But I guess in this book, I kind of wanted to reach underneath that, because yeah, the folk element, the kind of pagan element, like where Catholicism mixed with this sort of pagan religion, was just really fascinating to me. So I kind of just tried to dig a little bit deeper, because I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to kind of go back to at this moment in time.
Yes, I mean it's something that for me as well is very interesting from a point of view of trying to differentiate what is the kind of pre-Christian influence uh, from from the kind of from the Catholic influence on the culture, and sometimes that line is very blurry because of lack of lack of original sort of written materials about pre-Christian Polish lands and sort of Eastern European
Oh,
lands in general.
yeah. I think it's actually kind of impossible often to differentiate between the two, because they've almost become their own kind of amalgamation.
Mm,
And the thing about the Slavic religions, it's one religion, I guess, but the myths all varied from region to next region. The plants, even, someone could read how I use a plant and they could use it completely differently. Also, everything varied from region to region. That's why I think for many years people you didn't really talk about Slavic mythology, because there wasn't even one creation myth. There was
mm,
various creation myths.
yeah.
Um, so it was all so fragmented and then I guess Catholicism kind of united it all. But I mean, it was it was quite a painful unification for a long time.
Yes, I
Yeah.
mean it's really interesting actually. I was talking to this historian recently about how it's easier to recreate folkloric traditions and kind of just to pull out the pre-Christian folkloric stories, because a lot of them remain the same except for a slightly more realistic sort of add-on that
Hmm.
is very transparently meant to change your opinion of the story. And because there's very similar because there's very sort of similar stories in different regions about the same folkloric creature, you can kind of pull together the things that what those stories have in common. However, with mythology, it's a bit more difficult because the research into mythology is unless you go the kind of comparative mythology route, which is controversial, it relies on, basically digging things up, and those things might, and leaving them to interpretation, which is a bit more complex, isn't it?
Oh,
Um,
gosh. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I mean, I love reading about Slavic mythology, although, you know, I chose four stories for the book, one to kind of for each season, and I found it so difficult to find reasonably like just in this day and stories that are acceptable for this day and age,
oh, yeah.
that aren't just like someone taking their eyes out. There was actually with
I don't understand what's unacceptable about it.
there's so much like so many dark folk stories. And
Writer of dark fantasy, I find it perfectly acceptable.
Slavic folk stories can be really gruesome. But and that was actually a good ending because he had the evil eye. So that was actually a happy ending.
I mean,
Um,
I feel very happy for him.
So yeah, there was a part of me sort of thinking, God, I'd love to just like translate lots of Slavic folk stories. And then I was like, God, it would just be a very dark book. And then unless you start changing things, but then you make them into fairy tales, and then that's doesn't really.
Yeah, but doesn't sound like what you were after, because you're after that
Yeah.
authenticity, after the, like,
Yeah.
preserving things. And I mean,
They
it's
teach you
it
lessons. They're there to teach you
yeah.
lessons, and they were very brutal lessons because it was brutal life.
Yes, I mean, all folk, I would argue that a lot of, all folk tales around the world have a role in teaching values as well, and teaching consequences of breaking out of those values. So, um, for me, the kind of the spirit of like the value system of a society is what we can find out. So that's like, I see a big difference between the stories which are obviously steeped in Christianity,
Hmm.
from sort of that are repeated in that vein, versus the stories that were only slightly changed because their value systems are completely different.
Yeah, yeah, I see what you're saying. Um, yeah, and sometimes, yeah, you can. I see what you're saying. Sometimes you can really feel the Christian influence, and I kind of
Mm.
wanted to keep away from that a little bit as well because, you know, I kind of wanted just folks to include some folk stories that are very kind of I guess just teach you kind of deeper wisdom and not kind of Christian morality, which,
Yeah, I
yeah.
think of it like any stories that have that connection to the earth tend to be more linked to the kind of pre-Christian traditions,
Hmm.
because the um, ancient Slavs seem to have had a very deep respect for the natural world and for animals, and they considered animals to be um, on par with them, right? In terms of at least respect owed, um, but compared to the very human-centric value system um, that came later. But so when we talk about, like, your books sort of reminding us of like having that healthy respect for the knowledge that your grandmother has had, and that that was linked to sort of a more agricultural way of life. I think that ties in very well.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I guess that was the aim of the book. I guess a big one of the aims of the book. I think just a respect which leads to naturally harmony, I guess, within your mind, within your body, within your spirit, and that's good health. You know, throughout the book, I'm always sort of saying, don't use this as medicine. I don't want don't stop taking the antidepressants. You know,
Yeah.
I'm not saying you should replace modern medicine with the old Slavic ways.
Yes.
I'm saying do use them to preserve your health.
To
So
supplement.
to supplement,
Yes.
to keep yourself in balance so that perhaps, you don't need to, you know, use those medicines in the future.
I mean, the industrial way in which we look at food and medicine is keeping us more and more separate from nature. And there's some countries which do it more. The US, the entire sort of food manufacturing industry is so far removed from the kind of pastoral images that we get fed through TV.
Mhm.
And that is something that I've heard a lot of people talk about as a huge problem, where people in the States, especially in the urban areas, have completely lost awareness of where their food comes from. They don't have that link to the point where they don't connect, like, they see an apple in the tree, they will not pick it because they think that an apple should come from supermarket. That needs to be screened through this heavily industrialized sort of process in order to be fit for their consumption. Like, that is a kind of extreme example from social media.
Yeah,
So
I think, yeah, I mean, what you're describing sounds like an illness in itself, really. I mean, if you look at it from the
Mm,
outside perspective, someone coming in from another planet would be like, these people, what is going on here?
yeah,
And I guess this is something that it's now our challenge to come back from, we kind
to
of need
reverse.
to start being a bit more conscious about how we want to live in the future. And I think these old ways do have a place in it. And, I think, I don't want to be sort of like against big pharma or anything like that. Like, I don't want to make some massive stance, or like, but
I
I think
mean,
it's, I'm not saying I'm
this
for,
is my show. You can say what you want.
I don't like to offend people, although I think often I do. Um, um,
That's
but
an
I mean, it's
unusual
not
quality for a poll.
saying what I think. Um, I guess the thing is, it's not really in um the big businesses. It's not good for them. It's not good for business if people know how to keep themselves in such good balance uh, that they don't need the medicines. So I guess
Yes.
it hasn't been encouraged. This is the thing.
I think it's more, when it comes to, well, I mean, when it comes to the States specifically, it went from, um, the during World War II, it was found that a large percentage of the population is in such ill physical shape, they're so malnourished, so underweight that they just don't have, that's, coming after the Great Depression, but they just did not fit the minimal requirements to join the army. So it was, from a national security standpoint, it became imperative to modernize
Industrialized.
and
Yeah,
industrialize, but
yeah,
modernize
yeah,
their food. And but throughout the world we see this.
yeah. I mean,
Only within
yeah.
a couple of generations we went from extreme scarcity to huge overabundance.
Well, the problem is, I mean, I completely understand that yes, some processes, I guess, needed to be industrialized to move away from the brink of starvation.
Mm,
And yet somehow they've destroyed the balance so badly that, there are people in the world that are still starving, and there's others that are just kind of like, and there's the food waste. I mean, the food waste really kills me. I'm just trying to kind of think of a project that I can do with, where you sort of working with supermarkets where you take the food waste and you cook it up
distribute
for
it,
people that
yes. I
have
mean,
food, shortages,
I mean,
because
there's a lot of people who try to sort of deal with that, and I think France introduced laws, which I applaud, and I wish we would
Mm.
introduce here in the UK. Basically, make it illegal for like supermarkets to throw out their food, where they have to, if it's like a day out of used by day, they have to donate it to a supermarket that then can sell it at a much discounted rate.
There you go. Yeah, something like that. Or, they should just give it away free to people that need it. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, but that's just bad for business. Let's be
this
realist
is
here.
the
Come
thing. We're
on.
living in a world which is just obsessed with
Yes.
business, and I feel like
Mm.
perhaps it's time to kind of start reassessing our values. And a part of this book is, I guess it was meant to also just show you that, the, there was a saying actually that Magda's grandmother used to say, um, God plants around your house what you need for your good health. So you need to look around your own house and your own garden and see what weeds are growing there that you can brew or that you can take in some way, because they're specifically designed for you, which is a really lovely kind of way of looking at the world. And I've just moved into a new house and I'm seeing a lot of evening primrose growing. And I'm just like, oh, what can I do with this? What's my garden trying to tell me? Or,
It's a nice message. I mean, I find it so, and I feel like you do it very well in the book, just with finding a balance, because obviously we have, on the one hand, like the absolute extreme of industrialized food processes that create a lot of value for the companies and but create very low quality, low grade food products and limit the amount of different nutrients that people get, because by limiting the number of foodstuffs that they have, like, I think like nutritionists these days sort of talk about how people should have like 30 different plants in every week in their diet, right? Like as a like putting a number on it to make it easy.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's exactly 30 or
Yeah.
I expect it depends, but it's about like,
Yeah.
that is how much variety we need to thrive. And when you look at like most people's diet these days,
Mhm.
they might have rice, they might have potatoes,
Yeah.
peas and carrots every night, and like, that's about it for the week. And the rest is meat or bread maybe.
Mm.
But
Interesting. And I
yeah,
think instinctively I was kind of I didn't know that fact, but instinctively in terms of like feeding my children, I do encourage them to just eat a tiny, even if they don't like something, I'm just like, just take a bite of that avocado, or just take, or just have a little bit of this nettle tea, or because instinctively I feel like this just increases the different variety of bacteria in the gut. So
yeah,
I was sort of thinking along the lines of, it's not even the lines of like, oh, they need to eat this and have the vitamins and eat however many, but I was just like, you need as much variety as you can so that your gut is working properly. But I don't know, that's my own little theory, to be honest.
I mean, I can't comment on that with any degree of
It's
certitude.
interesting
It's
that you
more
said
about
that.
like the
Yeah.
micronutrients and macronutrients that
Yeah.
are provided in varying quantities and quality in
Yeah.
different plants. Um, but like the thing that I wanted to sort of ask you about is how you see the balance between that, you know, absolute extreme on the one hand,
Mhm.
and then we have sort of my generation millennials being so enamored with self-sufficiency as a concept, and the kind of we see the rise of kind of homestead lifestyle,
Mhm.
which take it actually takes back to scarcity, because anybody who tried to grow carrots in their back garden knows how inefficient production of those carrots is.
I do, yeah. I'm one of those people who's not green fingered, and I do try and grow things.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
I tried to plant purple carrots in my garden once. Out of the whole crop, one half-eaten carrot.
That was so frustrating. You know what
Yeah.
I tend to do though is I try lots of different things, and then I see what grows really well and what
Mm.
I actually get a lot of. And things like squash for me are always really effective. So
Yeah.
that's
So,
something I
so,
try.
so there's ways to sort of
Yeah.
counteract my ineptitude, but
But apart from that, I would say the balance could lie in just doing a little bit of foraging. Um,
Mm,
of course, I don't want to like encourage people to sort of go out and try and forage lots of things and sort of, and perhaps make themselves ill or something like that, like
mm,
mushrooms. I mean, even though I've
yes.
been picking since I was a child, I would still never go out without someone who I consider to be an expert.
I mean, I always foraged for mushrooms with my family, but the one rule we have for foraging anything is, if you don't know what it is, like 100% hand
Yeah.
on heart know what it is, it's poisonous.
Yeah, you do have to be really careful. I mean, and you do
Yeah.
have apps, I do have apps now.
But they are
Um,
not very reliable, so
they're
I would
not
not
always
recommend people.
reliable.
Yeah.
So, um, I mean, for me, what my rule is it if it's got a deadly counterpart that looks similar, even
Yes.
though even I think, oh, it's not that one. I'm not gonna have it.
Yes. But
Like
that's the
yeah,
100%. You have to be 100% sure because
yeah.
there's a story I sometimes tell about. I remember I was cycling in the Polish forest once, and I
Hmm.
saw this guy
Hmm.
picking mushrooms, which are very similar to porcini mushrooms, to
Hmm.
prawdziwki, but they're actually very much poisonous. And they're easy to tell because they have a red underbelly or like
Hmm.
reddish tint underbelly, szatany.
Mm.
And sort of I stopped on my bike and I could see he had a whole basket of those. And I told him, like, mate, these are poisonous. Like, what are you doing? These are poisonous. And he was like, no, they're not poisonous. These are porcinis. And I was like, okay. I said, okay, man. Like, he looked at me and it's like, this blonde girl, like, what, who are you to tell me? And I told him, like, okay, if you want to go and poison your whole family, go ahead, be my guest. I gave you the information. And, I cycled on,
No,
and
it's up to you. Yeah.
I hadn't heard of a whole family, dying later on. So I assume he must have like thought
Yeah.
twice about
Must
it.
have. Yeah. Yeah.
But
I mean, it does
yeah.
happen. My dad's a doctor, and actually, his friend, who's a doctor, used to be on the toxicity ward in Poland, and he said, for example, parasol mushrooms, which I used to love parasol mushrooms. I even gave them to my
Mm,
child, but they do look a lot like white toadstools, which are deadly. And he said at
mm,
least once a year you would get a whole family dying.
yeah.
What from eating, what they thought were parasol mushrooms, which seems to be like it seems to be a really obvious difference. And yet, if it happens, so now I'm like, you know what, forget it. If it's like,
Mm,
if it's gonna be that kind of a risk, it's not worth
yeah.
it.
And I mean, we're telling all these stories while trying to encourage people to forage. So,
Exactly.
but it's important, like with everything,
Yeah.
it's important to have that balance because you need everything has to be done responsibly in the same way that you can't undercook your chicken.
Yes.
You have to know what you're picking.
You
And
have to know 100%.
yeah.
But then there are things that, most people probably do know 100%, like nettles. Nettles are the one of the most nutritious things you can eat. You can put them in stew, you can make salads out of them, you can do teas, and I mean, they are just a gift, and most people just have them in their garden, and just I'm gonna
Mm,
some out of my vegetable patch tomorrow, but there's no way I'm throwing them away, I'm like
mm. It used to be like poor people's like rescue food in the spring when the stores ran dry and
yeah.
you had nothing left in the pantry. Nettles would come up, and then you could make soup with nettle soup, which in that time would have been just boiled water with nettles, but it was just sort of something to fend off starvation.
Bit of butter if you have it, and yeah.
Yeah. So it's a thing. So on the subject of balance, once
Mhm.
again, like I feel the sort of return, like where I was talking about the millennials being enamored with homesteading. There's a growing fashion for sort of a return to healthy living and like to closer bond with nature in aesthetic sense. And I feel like sometimes it's completely hijacked as a like, so instead of thinking about it in kind of being closer to the old knowledge and to sort of incorporating it the way you do in your book, kind of, you don't say do away with everything else, just incorporate all those different things. And I feel like that kind of movement can be hijacked, like in a kind of trad wife sort of videos. You see sometimes just disembodied, like hands of a woman who is kneading bread and doing everything the really slow, inefficient way. Um, and it's just, like, oh, I just went, but everything
So
is
nice
an
to look at it.
aesthetic. Yeah, I mean,
And
but
film it for like, because it obviously
yeah,
it takes a very long time to set up something like that. You would have to, I know because I'm on Instagram to take like a nice video, a nice photo, I've kind of I went through a phase of kind of trying to make everything look really beautiful, and like actually I think my styling got pretty good. I was really like into the kind of styling aspect of it, and then eventually I was like, this is just taking too long. Like this is just like, I'm not a stylist. Why am I spending my life like styling something for half an hour? And actually in real life it's not half an hour. I mean, for most of these like things that you see, it's like hours and hours of
yes,
styling. So it's not bringing you closer to nature if you're setting up equipment,
exactly.
styling props, and making everything look aesthetically beautiful for hours.
Absolutely. But I think there is like this hunger sometimes for things that appear easier yet are spectacularly not, because there's a lot of usually women's labor behind it.
Yeah.
So you want to have, it's like, it's so nice to see someone knead the
Yeah.
bread for like 5 seconds, because how
Yeah.
long can you watch them do it? uh
It's soothing. It's a soothing 5 seconds.
Soothing, and especially if it's not you doing it and then not your
Yeah.
wrists hurting after doing it, isn't it? So I think it's so important to like have that understanding that it can't be that, okay, all the women need to now, like, let's just roll back over our rights and just like go back to sort of homesteading.
But also
And
just cook rye bread. Rye is so much better for you and you don't need to knead it.
that's a good tip. That's a
There
good
you
tip.
go. Just make rye bread. You need rye in your diet anyway.
I mean, I think I'm all baked out when it comes to bread after the lockdown, frankly. I mean, if I never see another sourdough starter, I'll be fine. But I think just when it comes to food, and what we see as traditional food as well, I was thinking about something in terms of, in the context of your studies in Slavonic, sort of, food in Slavonic studies. Um, I've I've always found it interesting how we connect our identity to food in such a strong way. I did an interview with Becky Hadid, who does a podcast, The Storied Recipe, and
Yes,
she
I
is.
was on her podcast.
Oh,
Yeah.
you were amazing.
Yes,
So,
yes, she's lovely. Yeah.
we had that chat about how people link their identity so strongly to food, and yet,
Absolutely.
as obviously will know from your studies, national foods change so drastically across history, based on what trade links they are, the different superpowers and all that. Can you talk a little bit about that, like how?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think, gosh, a lot of Polish foods, I feel like, considered Polish foods, I think the government was trying to pin it down at one point, what are the 100
Good
most
luck.
Yes. Yeah, it's true because the Poles are so and I don't think just the Poles, in general, people are very protective of their traditions. But like when I was writing my pierogi book and I was writing sort of what is traditional, I was talking about pierogi, but I mean, it really applies to everything, what is traditional in one home is not traditional in another home. What is traditional in one village is completely done it in a completely different way in another village. So it's very difficult to pin it down. But because people's identities are so caught up with it, they will defend it to the death, you know. And my first
Mm.
cookbook, Polska, um, you know, I thought I was writing kind of just like a very, you know, simple, reasonably traditional Polish cookbook, maybe some little twists on it, some kind of a little bit more modernized, you know, because I guess it was for me, it was like a new take on kind of like quite traditional Polish foods. It didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary in that book. And yet when it got translated into Polish, it was so controversial. I didn't even know about this, but apparently there were shows on the radio saying, did she have a right to write this book? Because and it's just like the most, you know,
Oh my God, like the right to write. Oh,
it was revolutionary or it was controversial. It was, you know, depending on how you looked at it, some people were pro, some people were, you know, totally against. And I was just like, how can you be so pro and against this very, like, you know,
I mean,
family?
it's absurd, isn't it?
Yeah. But you know, I used
But
ricotta because I was trying to look at kind of a world audience, you know. So for example, we got used to making um our little dumplings, leniwe, with ricotta rather than twaróg. And when I was writing
Mm.
Polska, actually twaróg was quite difficult to find. You know, things have changed now. So I used ricotta in it. So little things like that really riled people. And clearly.
I mean, it's and yeah, it's just it's especially I think for people listening, it might seem like, you know, predictable in a way that, like, well, of course, you know, in this kind of, if you're writing about food from this region in France, like we all know what it is. Like in Polish food is so, it's so inconsistent, like you said, like from village to village. You know, I tended to have two Christmas dinners growing up, one with one set of grandparents, the other with the other set of grandparents. And the food, the traditional Polish Christmas food, was entirely different.
Oh, which areas were they from? I'm really interested.
So one side was more from kind of traditional kresy,
Oh, yes, yes. And what do
and
you there
so that's
Christmas?
kind of today's Ukraine, Belarus, which used to be sort of part of Poland, and then on the other side it was kind of more like Krakow and the sort
Yeah.
of the south. And
And what were the dishes? What were like the main dishes?
so so sort of the Krakow side, we had, like, you know, the biggest one was the like the mushroom soup.
Yes.
So the, like, dried
Mm,
wild mushroom soup.
yeah.
And then we had
Did you cook
uh
that with a
right,
pasta or uszka or anything like that? Or was it?
uh actually I very rarely ate it, but yeah, like actually uszka not no, not uszka. Uszka are more like for the beetroot soup. So the Kresy
Yes, yes,
family
yes.
would have that. And
They would
then
have the beetroot soup. Yeah.
dessert wise, like, you know, the thing was, like, you know, either kutia, which is
Kutia. Okay. Yeah, yes, I
it's
know. Yeah.
basically, but it's very
Wheat
hard to
berries.
explain.
It's wheat berries with poppy seeds and
Yes, with a poppy seed sort of paste made with
yeah,
honey and nuts and
yeah,
raisins,
yeah, yeah.
and then sort of
You had that
long
implicit?
flat noodles. Yeah, with a no, with a southern
Oh,
sort of
okay, okay,
thing,
okay. Yeah,
and then noodles with a sort of that are kind of flat, long flat noodles
yeah,
with that paste as well.
yeah.
And it's, you know, and the thing is that both menus were traditional.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. There's huge
So
differences. And yeah, I guess in pierogi, I really wanted to kind of highlight that. And unfortunately, because of lockdown, I didn't get to travel around the different regions.
mm,
But I did lots of just Instagram research, you know. I was just asking people like, what were your favorite pierogi? And people would come up with things that I'd never heard of before. And they
mm,
would contact their aunts who weren't on the internet and get these recipes for me. And yeah, it was a really wonderful way of doing research, actually. It was really enjoyable.
Yeah. And it's so amazing because you're sort of fostering
Yeah,
connectivity
yeah.
in a culture that actually likes to keep a lot of things separate as well.
Yes. And
Hence the controversy, possibly.
yes. Well, this is the thing actually with things like, like remedies. I think with remedies, actually, people are quite open, but when it comes to like nalevki, people are really secretive.
Yeah,
Like,
nalewki,
they
so
don't
like
want to tell you.
spirits, usually sweet spirits with
Yes,
made with
which are kind of
herbs. Yeah.
often considered medicinal. So they're very, very common throughout Poland. And yeah, I've tried some amazing ones, but people are often really quite secretive about what they put in there, and it's like, if you don't tell me, then that's going to die with you. I don't want to say that to people, but that recipe is going to die with you.
Yeah. I mean,
Don't be so secretive.
sometimes people are funny about things like that. It's
Well, apparently, a lady who runs the Museum of Kresy in Poland was telling me how the gospodynie, the women who used to run the households, um, they would share recipes, but often they would leave out very important ingredients because they didn't want anyone else to just recreate authentically their speciality.
mm,
So
but
that's why a lot of things got lost.
I mean, that is not my philosophy in life. But
It's annoying, isn't it? If you
it
actually.
is. I mean, if it was in my family, it was like, I can tell you a story. It was uh a sort of more extended family, not blood family, but it was this sort of auntie who she was not the friendliest of people, but she made this absolutely fabulous walnut and chocolate tort. It was
Mm.
spectacular. And she never wanted to give me the recipe. She would, she would beat around the bush, she would be fine. She's like, maybe one day if you visit me. And I never really visited her. I was not that close to her. So
Is it worth it?
and I really wanted that recipe. And I was
Did she
telling
ever
my
give it to you?
I was telling my grandma about it, and my grandma is a crafty woman. And she said, "Don't worry, Gabriela, don't worry. I'll get it for you." And she was like, "Get your notebook ready." And she sat and started conversation with his aunt. She said, this cake feels different than usual. Did you do something different? And it's like, no, I made it the same way I always did. Oh, it feels like there's so much butter in it. It feels very buttery. How much butter did you put?
Brilliant.
And it's like, does it have a lot of flour? I mean, it feels powder. Is it powdery? Like, do it have? It has no flour in it. And bit by bit, through sheer power of outrage, she managed to get the entire recipe for me. And I've made this cake multiple times since
Oh,
then.
that's wonderful. That's a brilliant story as well. I love that.
It was very tricksy. Makes that cake taste even better just because.
Exactly. That's the taste of victory. And sometimes you have to be clever about these things, especially with Polish cooks.
Yes.
Not
I
they're not
mean,
always
not
willing.
this cook. I will share everything.
I would share everything as well. I think that's part of the joy of cooking, and I think that's actually important. But I guess because identity is so part of people's kitchens, I guess sometimes when they give a recipe away, they feel like they're giving away a part of their identity and they don't feel as special anymore, because that's their special recipe. And I guess this is why a lot of Polish women
Yeah.
throughout the years just refuse to give away those special recipes.
I mean, I feel like if the only thing special about me was my recipe
It's
for a
sad, isn't it?
cake, then if that would require a whole lot of introspection on my part.
You'd think, but you know, I know, yeah. I mean, it's quite sad, isn't it? That, you know, that their identities were so, you know,
Mm.
but it's sad and it's also wonderful and it's also, you know,
Yes. Although the wonder of
everything.
it for me is in the
Yeah.
sharing. It's
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
And I'm really glad that you're sort of dug deep and you've shared some of those stories in this book. And I really recommend that everyone who listens to this gets it, because it's just so it's just like such a so visually stunning that it's
Oh,
just a pleasure to sort of, and you can sort of dip in and out of it. You don't have to try every cleaning product
yeah.
recipe, but like, if you just want to try like some, syrups, or like read the stories about, about your childhood novel, that is all engrossing.
Absolutely, and I think yeah, that is part of the joy of the book. It's not something that you have to read from cover to cover. You can just dip in and out, and a lot of this stuff is just it's very easy, you know. It's very simple.
No, thank you so much. Anything that you can share about like what's next? Do you have a plan for what you're going to do
Oh gosh,
next?
I'm going through at the moment, I think I'm going through kind of another rebirth, you know, after every book. I have a
I
kind of
know, I know.
rebirth. So yeah, which is a process. So it's difficult to say because you know I could share what I'm working on and then actually I could it could be something completely different a few weeks down the line. But
It's the alchemy of writing.
exactly, exactly.
Well, I look forward to it, whatever it may be.
Thank
And
you.
again, thank you so much. Thank you for watching the video. Every week there's something different. So click like and subscribe if you would like more. It really helps the channel. Thank you, and see you next week.